Allow me to start this webinar. Good morning, afternoon to our distinguished panelists and participants. Welcome to this webinar on biomass for hydrogen. So ways to facilitate the contribution to the sustainable energy transition. So that's the focus of our presentation, of our webinar today. As you may see from the screen, we have a distinguished panel of colleagues and speakers today. But allow me to give you just a brief overview regarding the Global Bioenergy Partnership, which is context in which this seminar, which is a series of seminars, is developed. The Global Bioenergy Partnership is an international initiative that was established to implement the commitment taken by the G8 in 2005. So it's already 17 years back. And since then, we have received renewed mandates from the following G7 and G20 since then. Brazil and the USA are currently co-chairs, while FAO is one of the founding partners and also hosting the Secretariat of the Global Bioenergy Partnership in the FAO headquarters in Rome under my coordination. As you may see from the slide, we have around more than 80 members between partners and observers, which are the governments, the countries, and the organizations, the internal organizations that you see on the left side of the screen. Well, just to contextualize this webinar of today, among the various activity groups of the partnership, there is a working group working on capacity building. And under this working group on capacity building, we have 8 activity groups, one of which is focused on wood energy. And this in the context of the wood energy activity group that we are organizing today, this webinar. Why? Because we like to facilitate the exchange of knowledge, lessons learned, practices connected to the use, how to make best use of wood energy in the context of forest landscape restoration, sustainable development, sustainable livelihood, and see how biomass, woody biomass, be used also for hydrogen purposes. And this is the case exactly of this webinar today. We know that hydrogen is seen as an attractive fuel, in particular for transport and electricity generation. And we also know that there are great potentials in terms of sustainable development, sustainable energy transition. So with this webinar, we will have an overview somehow of experiences from Europe, Brazil, and also specific technologies still in Europe. So without further ado, I would like now to give the floor to I could give the floor maybe to Marco to introduce the 3 speakers. Marco Colangeli is the moderator of the discussion session, but maybe Marco, you could also introduce the 3 speakers of this webinar today, and then moderate the discussion afterwards. Marco, over to you.
Thank you, Michela, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar. I would like to now give the floor to Professor Suani Coelho from the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. She will give us an overview of the biohydrogen developments in Latin America and specifically in Brazil. Suani, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Very kind from GBEP for this invitation. Let me see if I realize to put my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes.
Can you see it? Okay.
Yes,
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So I am from the University of Sao Paulo. I am part of the Research Center for Greenhouse Gas Innovation, which is a new research center introduced at the University of São Paulo, funded by FAPESP, our state-owned funding agency, and Shell company. And the idea of this short presentation is to give a brief overview of what's happening in Brazil in the case of hydrogen from biomass. And I would like to acknowledge the contribution of my... Sorry. And I would like to acknowledge the contribution of my PhD candidate, Danilo Peresi. Thank you, Danilo, for the nice slides that you organized for me. So why hydrogen today? Because hydrogen is a key element for energy transition, not only as a fuel for transportation and power, as heat for industries and buildings, or feedstocks for chemicals and product manufacturing. So more and more hydrogen is being considered an important energy source in the near future. It's important to realize that we can have a very flexible hydrogen production. We can produce hydrogen from water electrolysis using, for instance, renewable energy. We can produce hydrogen from fossil fuels, like natural gas or coal. In this case, if we combine it with CCS, we can have a better carbon balance, and using the natural gas reform or co-gasification. And by the end, but also important, we can have the biomass as a source of hydrogen through reforming, gasification, or electrolysis. So with these pathways, we can have a very low carbon hydrogen, which is important carrier for energy transition. Important also that we can put together hydrogen with bioenergy and with carbon capture and storage. As you know, probably, when we have bioenergy produced in a sustainable way, we have the absorption of CO2 in the photosynthesis process from the atmosphere. And besides that, we can absorb the CO2 from the industrial use process, like, for instance, sugarcane juice fermentation, and we can take the CO2 capture and storage, like geological sites, having a much better carbon footprint. And then we can put together the production of hydrogen from biomass together with this BECCS process, and it's an interesting option for this sector. So why hydrogen for Brazil? I would raise two main issues. In Brazil, we have a strong need for fertilizers. We can produce fertilizers from hydrogen. As you know, Brazil is a major agricultural producer with soybeans, corn, sugarcane, among others. It accounts for 30% of the cost of major crops, mainly in the state of Mato Grosso, in the Midwest of Brazil. For instance, in 2018, we imported 2 times the amount of we had imported in 2008. And more than 80% of fertilizers used in Brazil are imported. So this issue of fertilizer for us is a very important issue. Another point to be raised is that hydrogen can be seen as a next step in the energy transition. We have a high potential for biomass and renewable power. And as you probably know, Brazil freight is largely road-based on trucks. We have all of them trucks which are very heavy vehicles running on diesel, which is hard to decarbonize. We already have the use of biodiesel. We have our diesel blended with biodiesel, but we still import 25% of our diesel. And then the use of hydrogen produced from biomass and the use of this hydrogen in a higher efficient fuel cells. This would be an interesting option. Thinking about fertilizer, we have an interesting issue happening today. We have an agreement of Raízen, our biggest ethanol producer in the country. They made an agreement with Yara fertilizer plant to purchase 20,000 cubic meters per day from sugarcane Raízen. The idea is to replace 3% of the current natural gas use, and they plan to use 100% on biomethane by 2030. By the way, this is more or less the consequence of a project that our research group had performed to Yara, where we did the assessment of biomethane potential in this region for different productions. The idea is to have the biomethane injected into Congas utility pipelines and delivered from Raízen mill to Yara. Of course, this is an interesting circular economic concept. And then there are also studies for using biomethane powered trucks to transport the fertilizers. As you know, Brazil has a very important sugarcane industry. In the last season, from around 9 million hectares of harvest area of sugarcane, like 1% of the Brazilian territory, we produced almost 27 billion liters of ethanol, responsible by 38% of Brazil light vehicle energy demand. We also produced 42 million tons of sugar because Brazil is the largest producer and the first net export of sugar. We also produced electricity from sugarcane bagasse, 39 terawatt hour, which corresponded to more than 6% of the total national supply, besides the amount of electricity for self-consumption, because all mills are self-sufficient in terms of energy. And recently, we have a new product, biogas and biomethane, produced from sugarcane processed residues. We have 2 commercial scale plants, the one in Bonfim Mills producing 20 megawatts of electricity, the one in Cocal producing biomethane, which is transported in a dedicated pipeline to be used in transportation sector in the near municipality. And we have also other plants announced for biomethane. So considering these options, we can produce hydrogen from the ethanol, from ethanol reforming. We can produce hydrogen using the bagasse-based electricity through water electrolysis. We can produce hydrogen from this biogas with biogas reforming. And we can also put together this hydrogen with the CO2 captured, as I mentioned before, CO2 from fermentation, CO2 from bagasse combustion, CO2 from biogas upgrade. So we have interesting options, not only for hydrogen, but also to capture CO2 and to do the several processes based on this. We have developed some preliminary studies paying attention to the hydrogen potential in Brazil from the sugarcane sector. We consider basically the ethanol reforming, both from ethanol produced in first generation and second generation process, considering 40 liters per ton of cane in the distillery coupled with sugar production, with 23 liters per ton of cane produced from ethanol second generation. The second process, electrolysis from surplus electricity generation from the gas, we consider 49, around 50 kilowatt hour per ton of cane, and biogas reforming, where we consider around 9 cubic meter of methane per ton of cane. So based in this feedstock potential, we evaluated the hydrogen potential, and we got around 10 kilos of hydrogen per ton of cane. Well, it's important to remember that we have a huge sugarcane production. Last season, we produced more than 654 million tons of cane. So we could have more than 6.5 million tons of hydrogen produced in the country. But of course, for that, we need several policies to incentivize it. Some latest news, we have now a new project at the University of São Paulo, putting together, funded by Shell, putting together Raízen, the sugarcane producer, Hydro, producing the ethanol reformer, and the research group of USP. So we will have we will receive the ethanol from Raízen. We will have this ethanol transported to a fuel station at the University of São Paulo at the campus stored. We will have the ethanol steam reforming process with 2 pilot plants of 5 kilos per hour of hydrogen producer, more or less 38.5 liters of ethanol per hour each plant. There are perspectives to be scaled up, but by now, these 2 pilot plants are going to be in operation. The idea is to have the hydrogen compressed and stored and to supply for buses running in the University of São Paulo campus. Why this is important? We do not need to retrofit current refineries, and then refineries can focus on the other investments, biogas, biomethane, CCS, ethanol second generation. We don't need hydrogen pipelines. We can use existing liquid fuel distribution and avoiding costs and deadlocks of new infrastructures. We have an important reduction chance of hydrogen leakage, and we have interesting potential for on-demand hydrogen production. We still talking about latest news. We have the largest biomethane plant in Ceará, northeast of Brazil, already producing biomethane, like 90,000 cubic meters per day from a landfill. And now they just announced that they are going to use this biomethane to produce a clean hydrogen through the biomethane reform. Considering this idea, we did some recent evaluations of the potential for hydrogen production for biogas in the sanitation sector. And considering that we have a biogas potential in Brazil of 2.2 billion cubic meters per year, or related to biomethane, 1.13 billion cubic meters per year, we can have a hydrogen potential only in the sanitation sector, about 2.35 million tons per year, distributed in the country, mainly focused in the state of São Paulo. We can also, my last slide, one of my last slides, we can also think of producing hydrogen from gasification, from refuse-derived fuel gasification, from municipal solid waste. And also, we have got interesting potentials for this advanced technology. And the main important issue to be remembered is that when we are having new and high added value for residues, mainly municipal solid waste, we are contributing for the sanitation in the country. As you know, in Brazil, as other developing countries, we still have lots of problems of municipal solid waste adequate disposal. So we have to pay attention to look for solutions for this collection and disposal of municipal solid waste. So the production of hydrogen is an additional product that can contribute to the feasibility of the adequate disposal of municipal solid waste. My final slide, some final remarks. So why hydrogen from biomass? You can have the decarbonization of heavy vehicles. We have an important potential use for fertilizer production, closing the loop. As I said, we are highly dependent of fertilizer imports. We can have the possibility of negative carbon footprint, putting together with BEC. As we saw, we have a sugarcane potential very important. The first project of ethanol reforming now on the way at the University of São Paulo. We can have also corn ethanol, which is now leading biofuel expansion in agricultural states like Mato Grosso, with an important potential for hydrogen in trucks. We can also produce methanol from hydrogen combined with CO2, since methanol is an important liquid biofuel with several different uses, and even to export. As we saw, we have significant potential in other sectors, not only sugarcane, for instance, the sanitation sector. But what are the challenges? Brazilian civil society must understand the need for change, for hydrogen, for energy transition. We have to disseminate this idea so Brazilian civil society can be aware of it. And of course, we still have a lot to work for adequate policies, which are not full in place yet. So I think this is it. You have my email here, and thank you very much for the invitation. And I give you back the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Suani. This was a very interesting presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed. It's been very interesting for me to learn about the ongoing projects that you've had in collaboration with Shell and the sugarcane producers. Now, before we take a question, I suggest we move to the next presentation, if that's okay. And then I will also ask attendees to write possibly their questions in the Q&A section, so that then we will keep track of all these questions, and then we can address them to each of the speakers separately when the time comes. If that is okay with everyone, I will now give the floor to Professor Franco Cotana, who is a professor from the University of Perugia in Italy, and also, he is a co-chair of the EU Strategic Energy Technology Plan for renewable fuels and sustainable transport. I mean, he's also very well known in Italy in his field, because it's been leading a number of initiatives, and also specifically applied laboratories to test and always research new technologies in the field of bioenergy. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Professor Cotana for his presentation. Franco, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Michela Moraes to invite me to give the speech on renewable energy, hydrogen from biomass. And I try to can you see the presentation? Maybe I put in the full screen. Okay. Like this?
We still see. Okay, now it's fine. It's very fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Just, yes. I'm in the CRB, which is the Research Center for Biomass at the University of Perugia, where is hosted also the International PhD on Energy and Sustainable Development, supported by Environmental Ministry since 2003. And as is well known, hydrogen is not an energy source, but an energy carrier. Therefore, hydrogen must be produced from technological available energy source at a low cost. There are various technologies for the production of hydrogen, but this production takes place from three main energy sources: nuclear, renewable energy, and the fossil fuel. As you can see in this slide, the fossil fuel is the one of that is currently used for its low cost, not maybe in Europe, not very low at the moment, but renewable energy sources are to growing rapidly if the carbon tax and the price still have at a very high price for fossil fuel. A part of the nuclear power available in some countries such as France, Denmark, the renewable hydrogen or clean hydrogen could be produced from renewable energy source. A large part of this energy, such as wind and photovoltaic, are not programmable energy and require a large storage system. The available and programmable energy source is bioenergy, of course. Bioenergy like biogas, upgrading to biomethane, for instance, so like sustainable lignocellulosic biomass that are available in a large quantity. And also, you can see here three different technological paths to convert biomass to hydrogen. Molecular to molecular, not pass through by electricity, but convert directly the biomass to hydrogen. Some of these technology are not ready for the market, but some other are still ready, like steam reforming, as you well know. I see before from the speech of Suani. And also steam gasification still became available to the market. In this slide, you can see some example of herbaceous crop and marginal land used in Europe, also in Italy, to produce biomass for biomethane, no biomass, the biogas. This some example like cardum or cardamus, wild boars avoid them, is not a secondary problem in our country, and are suitable for transforming the biomass in biomethane. But a large quantity of lignocellulosic biomass are also available to transform this lignocellulosic, part of this, in wood chips and by gasification in syngas in order to obtain hydrogen. The first technology starting from biogas, biohydrogen is now producing in some application, but a large program in Italy and Europe is still financing now for producing some billion of cubic meter a year of biomethane to put in the grid. And the very interesting things is that in this case, some some CO2 are not re-emitted in the atmosphere, but is stored in solid fertilizer. So there is not the possibility to capture and storage the CO2, but also there is the possibility to store the CO2 in the land as a fertilizer. In the other side, lignocellulosic biomass represent a great energy source, as we can see in this table. At least in Europe, forests are expanded and continuously increases. Not like in Brazil, but in Europe, it still increase about more or less 1% of year in surface of land. Some land are abandoned, so are transformed in the forest. And we have a lot of opportunity to use this lignocellulosic biomass for energy. In the next slide, you can see the forests are a great source for environmental and offer multifunctional services. In addition to the absorption of CO2, they maintain biodiversity, are used for tourism, for food products such as asparagus, truffle, mushroom, game, and so. And finally, each 30 years, they allow a sustainable harvesting of wood for various uses. Wood is used for furniture, for packaging, for energy. A part of this energy, for example, 20% could be transformed in biohydrogen or renewable hydrogen. Just see what happened in the house when the fire transforms some wet wood in a flame. You can see the characteristic hydrogen produced by wet wood. The technology for converting the wood into biohydrogen or renewable hydrogen is described in detail in the report published in 2019 by International Energy Agency Bioenergy. And in this technology, they based on the direct conversion by gasification of wood chip to obtain syngas, to which high temperature steam is added to increase the hydrogen content. The process is called steam gasification, as you well know. In the wood steam gasification process, the hydrogen reach up 70%. And also in the same report, the selling price of biohydrogen obviously depend on which power we are considered, but the selling price could be less than 3 euro per kilo in the big one power plant, 50 megawatts power. And this is the plant in Germany, in Senden, where 1 kilo of biohydrogen is obtained, but each 12 kilo of dry wood chip. And this is the other plant in Italy from INEA, which reproduce in the small scale the same process. You have to consider this energy balance. About 12 kilos of dry wood chip is sufficient, is enough to convert, to produce 1 kilo of CO2 with high efficiency. Instead of this, you have to consider the second path to convert biomass to power, and then the power by electrolyte to convert in green hydrogen. And you can see you lost more than 80% of energy. So it's more convenient to convert directly the wood chip into green hydrogen. And also here you have a biochar as a result of this process in order to store the part of CO2 that is not re-emitted in the atmosphere. Moreover, in Europe, the path towards European hydrogen is represented in these slides. In the next 10 years, a very huge financing is devoted to finance the production of hydrogen. And more of this is also from developing electrolyzer that at least say gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzer in Europe are expected in 2034. But in 2030, we expect at least 40 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzer to produce up to 10 million tons of green hydrogen. And then after 2030, we start with a very large decarbonizer sector hard to abate. Moreover, in this year are approved 2 or 3 hydrogen wave in IPCEI, which are the common, the important project of common European interest. The first one was approved in July of this year, and involving 15 members of the Europe member state, and provide up to 5.4 billion in public fund, which is expected to unlock additional 8.8 billion in private investment. Again, in September 21 of this year, Commission EU approved up to 5.2 billion of public support in involving 13 member states for second important project of common European interest. And we expect that this financing unlock additional 7 billion in private investment. Now there is the third IPCEI capacity hydrogen. The first 2 was technological, user, and then capacity. Is under negotiation, but we expect the same, roughly the same budget. And in detail, these are the member states involved in the first wave, hydrogen wave IPCEI. And about sustainability of the chain, converting biomass to hydrogen in order to the most significant important pillar is to receive the financing. We have to respect the do not significant harm principle. What does means? That means that you have to reduce the CO2 re-emitted in the atmosphere during the converting process. What's happened if we apply this principle to the production of renewable hydrogen, is very interesting. We in our biomass research center, we estimate that very good results we obtain to convert directly biomass in renewable hydrogen. First, you have to consider, I told before, that biomass are the only energy, renewable energy, that capture CO2 from the atmosphere. And the second, the production chain of renewable hydrogen from biomass, only a part of CO2 is re-emitted in the atmosphere. In fact, in the two main process, renewable hydrogen producing by steam reforming from biomethane chain is sequestered on digestate or as organic fertilizer, about 3 tons of CO2 for each ton of hydrogen. And again, in the renewable hydrogen production by steam gasification is sequestered in the biochar as fertilizer, about 1 ton of CO2 for each ton of renewable hydrogen. Okay, this is the figure that I want to see. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Cotana. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I very much appreciated the comparisons and the link with gasification. As you know, this is stems from the wood energy work that GBEP has put forward. So very interesting that you make this link, and I'm looking forward to the exchange of questions and answers later. I have a few questions myself. So, but without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our third distinguished speaker, Thorsten Schwab from GIZ in Germany. So Thorsten, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marco. So let me jump right in and continue with some insights from another point of view, from another angle, maybe. So I'm from the PTX hub, and as you can see by the name Power to X, it's not hydrogen hub. It's the Power to X hub because we try to focus on the whole picture rather than hydrogen. And this is my angle, my point of view. And when you invited me, thank you for that. We talked a little bit about what role does biohydrogen play in Power to X? And let us jump to the next slide. Let me see if I can do it here. Yes. So let's start a little bit from the beginning. So we, here we go. Yes. So if as mankind, we want to really become free of coal, oil, and gas, if we really want to bring our emissions to zero, we have a long way to go. And we have a certain order that we have to do things, but we have to do them even if the order is by importance, by time, it's all in parallel. So first we have to bring all the energy efficiency in that we can in all the sectors, in the buildings, the transport, the heating, the power sector, the industry. We need to be as efficient as possible. And that impacts also all the bio routes to be very, very efficient, together with all the others, with all the usage, with all the demand. And of course, we need to reach 100% renewable energy. So that means completely free of coal, oil, and gas, and not only in energy, but we'll come to that. Now, if we go renewable energy, the most efficient way, if we can, is the electrifying. So heat by heat pumps or cooling with the air conditioners. Maybe some industrial process heat with microwaves instead of burning something. And also bringing electricity into the transport sector, which is well on its way, with the exception of the very hard to abate ones. So. And then in the end, there's the Power to X approach, where we can actually provide drop-in fuels or chemicals, platform chemicals, and so on, based on renewable power and, of course, biomass. But even if we have the name Power to X hub, I would say don't do Power to X unless you really need to, because we need all these all the substances and everything we can, and Power to X is not the most efficient way to go about things. But let's have a look at this, the whole picture. And I brought this slide here to explain a little bit our approach, our vision, our perspective on green hydrogen. Take a minute, have a look. So if you look at this, we divide it into the decarbonization and the defossilization. So the decarbonization is the lighter background part there. And it actually means everything where we take the carbon atom completely out of the picture. So if we do electrify something completely, like heating a house without burning gas or burning any carbon-based fuel, do it with electricity, do it with a heat pump. The same goes for mobility. Then we're actually decarbonizing something. Then if we still need a molecule which contains carbon, it would be a defossilization. That's the rest of the picture. But in the end, we want to provide everything that mankind needs today. So that's all the sectors you can see here: chemicals, cosmetics, pharma, aviation and shipping fuels, industry, steel, chemical, others. And we need to still provide these in the future. Now, there's some industries that can get almost rid of carbon completely, like the steel industry. A little bit of carbon is necessary, but most of it can be substituted by pure hydrogen. And that's actually one of the very few sectors that can use pure hydrogen in the form it comes. The other one, if you go fertilizers, you need the ammonia. That's not in the picture here, but it's one important way. And all the rest is hydrocarbons. And now you can, when you look at the picture, you can see that hydrogen then combined with a carbon source could come in the form of carbon, or as Franco said, very rightly so, there's a lot of syngas being produced in many of the bio routes. And that's actually the input for the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, one of which can do hydrocarbons. Another route would be the methanol route, could work with CO2. So the carbon can come as carbon, as CO, or as CO2. And here in the picture, we depicted the carbon sources we have available. That could be direct air capturing. That's the most elegant and the most talked about, but it's not on a technology readiness level that we can use, and it's quite expensive. We can also capture and use carbon from any exhaust, and that shouldn't be a lock-in effect. So the CO2 from the coal-fired power plant is probably not as good as an idea as to take CO2 from processes that will prevail in a defossilized future, like a cement plant or so. But as you can see here, we put the biomass and the biogenic residues right there at a carbon source and also a water source. So the bit of water that comes out could be an interesting thing for the hydrogen production, but in an electrolysis process. So the PTX view on hydrogen is, I could say, not about hydrogen. It's about what you do with it in the end to provide the products we need. And the biogenic residues, we consider a carbon source and with a bit of water, but not a green hydrogen source for the hydrogen itself, because the value of it is in the carbon that's contained in the biomass. So that's a little bit of a different view. And one of the questions that goes with it is, what do we want in the end in the molecule? Do we want the energy content, or do we want the molecule with its characteristics as a molecule? So if we intend to do maybe a skin cream or a wax to preserve tropical fruits or so, we're interested in the molecule. If we produce aviation fuel or shipping fuel, we're interested in the energy content. And that makes a difference on how the whole setup will be put. Now, moving on to have a little bit of a closer look to the carbon source, we can see most of the carbon that we use today is used for energy and fuels and stems from oil, gas, and coal. Now, if we take away oil, gas, and coal, carbon becomes a very rare product, becomes a very rare input. So it's so valuable to the whole PTX setup and a completely defossilized economy that we shouldn't forget about it. It's more valuable, I would say, than the hydrogen, because hydrogen is relatively versatile in its production. It can be provided in many ways. And as we saw before, usually we don't even want the hydrogen in the end, but we want something as a higher aggregated value, any hydrocarbon, ammonia, or something else. So if we look at this, we see that tomorrow on the right-hand side, the fossil carbon should be gone and all the rest of the carbon should be provided somehow. And you can see that the biomass just doubled its necessity to provide all this carbon. And most of it is for food and feed. Some is for chemicals. Very little is for energy and fuels, because the energy content contained is probably not the most efficient if we go about it in molecules and fuels, but more directly electric. So that's a PTX view on this one. If we think of time for the carbon atom to go into the atmosphere and come back, we can illustrate that with these circles on the right-hand side and say, okay, if we can actually bring it to human times, then bio and direct air capturing are the only ones that can be considered renewable in human terms. And we have to be very efficient with this also and try and keep these circles as closed as possible. If we compare them, we can see that direct air capturing, of course, is the best that could be applied all over the world, but it's very expensive and technology maturity is not there yet. So that would be the machine you can see on the right-hand side on the picture. The biogenic sources are very, very interesting today because where they are available, that's the restriction. The technology maturity is there. It's a very high maturity. We can use it. It's a relatively low cost, and it can be scaled where there are actually installations. And the interesting thing about this scalability is that the size these biorefineries come, as we can see all over Brazil, is more or less the size that would fit the new generations of PTX machines. That usually we say the bigger the better, but carbon being the restraint, we have to scale to a size where we can actually provide hydrogen, carbon, and then all the follow-up process, and that needs to go together. So here we can say that we're in the right range of size. The last option would be CCU, industrial point sources. They don't have a closed carbon cycle if the material that goes into the industrial process is from fossil sources. So we shouldn't use them forever, but as a transition technology, they serve, and the costs are quite low to provide the carbon, usually as CO2 in the exhaust gas, and the technology maturity is also on a good level. What we have to take care of is not to create a lock-in effect. So give any fossil technologies that we actually don't want a reason to live on, and that shouldn't happen. But there's enough sources, I guess, where this could work quite well. Now, going back to what we can do with Power-to-X, these are the materials we usually want. So we want methane and methanol. We want to do Fischer-Tropsch for a Syncrude, which is a substitute for the fossil crude oil. Then ammonia and alcohols, that would be the typical chemicals and platform chemicals we need. We do have the energy applications also. So we need a substitute for natural gas at some point. We need some energy storage maybe. Maybe we want to use these in combustion engines and gas turbines, but usually in fuel cells. Here, hydrogen as a pure product actually comes in, but it's not so much of a demand. The refining is quite an interesting thing. As long as we do refine longer hydrocarbons from maybe crude oil, then the hydrogen comes in as a very important product. But phasing out coal, oil, and gas, it becomes less and less important. So the left-hand side, the chemical industry, is what is the one that will prevail, and we will need to provide materials for that. And the numbers are really high. It's nice to see the numbers Sueni presented. They are big, as we're used to from Brazil, but they're promising. So we can actually provide many of these products the chemical industry around the world needs. And the sectors that most need our attention are shipping and aviation for the fuels, and steel and chemical, and that includes pharmaceutical and cosmetic for the industry sectors. So we have here so much to do and so much to provide that all the other sectors are possible offtake sectors. But if we really want to bring about a defossilized future for the whole globe, there is, let's say, sectors where it's a no regret option to invest. Now, 2-3 last slides with some words to sustainability. When we look at the topics we look at, we usually look at carbon emissions. And we see the emissions and we say we have to be climate neutral, but there's so many other things we should not forget. So we should avoid the tunnel vision, and we should think of setups where we can actually provide a solution for the sustainable development goals as a whole. And the cool thing about combining green hydrogen from renewable electricity with any biotechnology, so if we combine the energy content from the electricity harvested by wind and sun together with the carbon source bio, be it solid, liquid, or gaseous, it's usually in distributed setups, it's in a size that would benefit the whole society and has a lot of effects in situ. So we can do closed carbon cycles, we can do even closed economic circular economies in municipalities, in federal states, in countries, in regions, and of course the globe also. But the chances are that we can socialize what is today the fossil world. And that's a chance we should try and make the most out of it. Now, if we have a last look on PTX and considering it under this sustainability glass, there is the levels of, I'll go one back, the levels of products, the processes you use to produce these products, and of course the policy framework all these industrial processes embed in. We have the environmental sphere, so we have to take care of energy, carbon, water, what's with the land use, do we infringe the biodiversity, how about the critical raw materials we need for catalysts and all the other things? Because if we go about this big scale, we need so many machines that materials become critical. That starts at copper. If we need all that renewable electricity, we need a lot of it. So we have to take care of these critical raw materials. And of course, local pollution and risks. Not by default, all the renewable products and climate-friendly products are non-toxic. So we have to take care of this. The next sphere is the economic sphere. We have a chance of decoupled growth. So let's decouple the economic growth from the fact that with with growing economy, we would harm the planet more. It's possible to do both, save the planet and grow, especially with these technologies. Then we want to have local value added. We want to bring up society, create employment, get a more resilient energy mix, and bring in, of course, innovation to most places in this world. And here's a chance to leapfrog. So many countries can just leapfrog over the fossil ways that industrial countries did. We can just jump into a clean future. The infrastructure that will be built is an issue, and of course, circular economies. We have the social aspects. We should fight energy poverty. We should bring access to energy. We have to watch out for the gender equality, for the human rights, labor standards, and all in all, bring about a just transition into that green future. And last, the governance issues that wrap around it. So all this should be for a good political progress, I would say. Give more stability to people, have a higher quality of life. In governance, of course, we need local ownership and regional ownership, and that is possible because we usually go about local vocations and local wishes to bring the society forward. That wraps it up. So that was the PDX view on green hydrogen and the biogenic sources. And I know it's a little bit of a different perspective, but I hope that with this, we get new insights, and maybe if we partner up the right way and bring together the bio world with the electric world, we can actually be the counterweight for the fossils. Thank you.
Thank you, Thorsten. That was a very interesting view, a different one, like you said, and I'm sure that there will be areas where further discussion might be ignited by your really nice presentation. It's a different perspective, and different perspectives are always meant to enrich. So I believe that there will be a discussion that will follow this. I do have a point when speaking about decarbonization and not including bioenergy sources. To an extent, also Professor Cotana presented a very valuable role of biomass as a decarbonizing means, because through certain conversions of biomass, in fact, we know we can, in fact, store carbon into the soil, recalcitrant carbon, for longer than 1,000 years. So that is a very long time frame. And in that sense, I mean, recent studies are demonstrating that that is the most cost-effective decarbonization, carbon capture and storage activity. So into that, maybe my first question would be, how is that factor in the view of PTX, which is very coherent, very interesting, but in my perspective from this specific point? I don't know if Professor Cotana agrees, disagrees with my reading, let's say, of the situation, and then the floor to Thorsten for his reply.
I agree with the perspective of PTX vision. It's a very interesting perspective that I'm convinced, I believe that in the future we have two main energy carriers. One is the electricity and the other one is the hydrogen, you know. And in this perspective, we can do everything. We have to, in growing the network of transmitting electricity network, we have to improve the infrastructure for transport energy, not only to produce in local as a community, energy community, renewable energy community. It's starting from RED II directive, but also we need to storage the energy. We need to transform the energy in product. And I think the future we can, is our future to design the best future for our young people, for our next generation. And in this perspective, both visions are compatible, both together. In the next year, also, I believe that the biomass play a big role in decarbonization, because we are ready to transform the very huge biomass in bioproduct, but also in energy and biohydrogen. And I believe we estimate, for instance, that only in Italy about 50% of renewable hydrogen will be produced by biomass or biomethane, because we are ready. We are ready because we have a lot of plant of biomethane, also in Italy, in Europe, in Germany, and so. And this biogas could be transformed in biomethane power plant to put the biomethane in the grid and to collect this biomethane in the power plant that already exists. For instance, in Terni, we have a big power plant in the iron factory that they produce, is able to produce about 2,500 tons a year of hydrogen. But now they produce this quantity of hydrogen by natural gas. If we sign agreement with different power plant, they put in the grid the biomethane, we can obtain directly, not waiting a year, but waiting just few months, the biohydrogen to start. For instance, the transportation train from Terni to Sulmona L'Aquila for application ready to start the technology on this field. It is very important to start to convert the economy with the two main energy carrier, electricity and hydrogen. But to do this, we need technology ready to start. So I believe in biomass are quite ready, and also the utilization of lignocellulosic biomass, especially in Italy, where we use only 30%, comparing to 75% in Europe for energy and so, is very important to push the economy in the right path and to decarbonize the economy. So in this vision, I think both visions are interesting. In the prospective, Power-to-X is very interesting also to obtain polymer, but at the moment, I believe that all technology are needed to quickly convert the old economy in the new economy, green economy.
Perfect. Yes, yeah, I agree totally. The biomass as it grows is such a great carbon capture device, right? So
Exactly.
you just take carbon out of the atmosphere at room temperature, you could say, and that is so efficient for the carbon capture process. And as Franco said, there's so many things already available. So if you have biomethane, why would you do hydrogen? Just use the methane. There's a lot of methane to be substituted, fossil methane to be substituted. And there's so much more the biomass or the biogas or liquids can provide. So when we say defossilization and decarbonization, we see decarbonization as a part of defossilization, but the noble objective is the defossilization. So get away from coal and crude oil and gas, natural gas. So the biomass comes in as a very important factor for water, for carbon, and there is some hydrogen that comes with it also. the energy content, which is today one of the very interesting things for biomass, will probably, that's a guess, I don't know, but that's a guess, will probably become less important since the molecules in the biomass become more important. So we need the carbon for other things, like for jet fuel, for cosmetics, for chemical industry, not now. So completely right. I agree with Franco to the max to say, okay, today we should apply all we have and bring the technology forward. We have to get on with the learning curve. It's only talk about it is not enough. So we need machines, and we need to try out and test out possibly all routes we can get our hands on. And the biomass is already the biogas is already being discussed as a very important input for PTX processes. So how do these, like jet fuel production via the Fischer-Tropsch route, how does that work? Like take the biogas and put some additional hydrogen to it, and then create the right ratio of syngas, of 1 part of CO to 2 parts of H2, and then put it into a Fischer-Tropsch reactor, which is already licensed and everything for aviation, which is quite an important thing now to be certified. And those seem to be the most cost-efficient machines for jet fuel production in the midterm, based on biogas. So there is biogas, and there is some energy content coming in by additional green hydrogen. So combining these two. Now the ligno biomass, like the heavier components, are so much more rich in carbon that you need more hydrogen, bring more hydrogen in, and then you can do the same things. And yes, I also agree that biomass can be a sink, a carbon sink. And that's another very interesting thing. So it would not only defossilize the value chains, it could even defossilize the atmosphere. Because in the end, what we did is we used to have biomass, which turned into oil and coal from some million years ago. And we happened to put it back into the atmosphere, which was probably not such a good idea. So now we can defossilize also the atmosphere by having these sinks. And once direct air capturing really works and is very cheap and can be rolled out all over the world, but I don't see that coming yet. And that could also be used to decarbonize the atmosphere again. But yeah, great stuff. So if we get these things together, if we go about all the possible routes, and we bring all that know-how and already available technology of all the biotechnologies together with the synthetic value chains that are coming up right now, I think this is the important thing, to partner up and to become in volume something promising to actually be able to substitute coal and oil.
Wonderful, Torsten. Yes, thank you very much for your intervention. And in fact, always, again, building up on your words, I really liked also the proposition of not having a tunnel vision, when it comes to choosing alternatives, because there is not only one objective. It's not only carbon emissions, it's a plethora of objectives. And again, coming from FAO and the Global Energy Partnership, I know very well how much bioenergy and the agricultural side of things, it really embraces a number of SDGs. Something that in Brazil has been done probably for the first time at a very large scale with the bioethanol industry. And so with this, I would like to ask a question to Suani. You mentioned that policy work is needed in the country to enable, say, the deployment of biohydrogen at a scale. What type of policies do you believe are missing at the time as we speak in order to, so what are the barriers, the political barriers, the policy barriers to that you encounter today in Brazil? And then we will see if there is any such thing also in Europe, on the European side. Suani, please, you have the floor.
Okay. Well, in fact, in the case of hydrogen, we do not have any policy yet. We are still discussing the issue of biomethane and biomethane injection in the natural gas grid. So the main discussion now in the country are related to biogas and biomethane and injection of biomethane in the grid. So hydrogen is such a new option that people are not still paying too much attention to that. But as I showed, there are some initiatives on the way, like the one in northeast of Brazil. And for sure, the results and the experience based on these initiatives will help to develop policies. We do not have regulations. By the way, we do not have regulations for hydrogen, for carbon capture and storage. We still need a lot of discussion on that. So the only policies that are now being discussed, as I said, is the biomethane injection in the grid. But on the other side, we have these pilot plants, as I mentioned, for hydrogen production from ethanol reform. We have the vehicle from Nissan, which is running with the ethanol reformer on board, being tested in Brazil. So they do not have to carry a hydrogen tank; they carry an ethanol tank, and then you have the reformer on board and the fuel cell and so on. So we have some experience, some testing underway, but we still do not have regulations for that. And so I think we still have some technological barriers because the technology is not so well developed and so well spread. We have this initiative at USP, as I mentioned, which is based at hydrogen reformer, but it's a small plant yet. You have to scale up. So we still have technological barriers. We have regulatory barriers. We have economic barriers. So I think we have a full set of challenges that we have to address to develop hydrogen. But there are a lot of colleagues working on that in laboratory scale. We have a group working on the methanol production from hydrogen and CO2. We have other colleagues working with regulatory issues. So we have different groups working on that, trying to address all these challenges that we still have. But it's something very, very new in Brazil. Maybe because we have some new plants in Rio for water electrolysis using wind and solar to produce hydrogen. Based on these plants, maybe we'll start discussing more these issues related to challenges and what are the difficulties.
Thank you, Suani. Thank you. I don't know if there is any question from the audience, from the attendees. I've seen none in the Q&A, so I'm not sure if people are shy or if there is some some problem with the functioning of the Q&A chat. I do not believe so. So maybe just to close up, one question also for our Europe-based colleagues about policies. We know that green hydrogen by the European Commission is listed as electrolysis hydrogen. But you know, the interesting discussion is whether there is the need for normative work. And as FAO, as the Global Bioenergy Partnership, we do believe there is, but we would like to get your perspective on valorizing also biohydrogen as a source of green hydrogen, which receives a treatment in terms of incentives and policies that is different than other forms of hydrogen. So I don't know what is your feeling. I don't know who wants to take this question, if Thorsten or Professor Cotana, because it was mentioned that by Professor Cotana, the interest at the European level for hydrogen, but the difference between green hydrogen in the normative work, at least, it's something that it's interesting to discuss. So I don't know if you have any feelings or any ideas on that.
You're right, Marco. There is a policy oriented to the electrolyte path for producing green hydrogen. Also, in some definition in directive, some people spoke about green hydrogen in terms of produced by electricity. But I'm fighting against this definition because there are other directive or other communication from EU that they spoke in general hydrogen obtained by renewable energy. So in the renewable energy, we have also biomass, you know. Just last week, I have a meeting with my group because my group in a working group 8 inside the SET plan, Strategic Energy Technology Plan, are involved in bioenergy and biohydrogen and also renewable fuel for sustainable transport. Renewable fuels for sustainable transport, what does mean? Means every renewable fuels obtained from power to X or obtained from biomass and all of this. So I'm convinced also the Italian politician to have a wide approach to the generation of renewable hydrogen. You know, that means obtained by renewable energy. I'm totally agree with Thorsten when he said that it is very important to obtain also the new carrier, energy carrier hydrogen from biomass, because biomass are the only renewable energy that capture the CO2 from the atmosphere and store a part of this to the land or in other parts. So I believe that it's very important to enlarge the concept, and I fighting to have a good results. Also in the presidents of Council Italian, we have a group for bioeconomy, and we discuss about this problem because most of member states in Northern Europe don't have they have a lot of electricity from wind energy, no, you know, and they have a problem. The problem is where we store the electricity when is overproduction appear, where we put this energy. And one way is to transform the electricity in hydrogen. But I'm also convinced that the business plan ran very well also with biomass, because biomass are ready all day during the 1 year, in the winter, in the summer, and so on. So the business plan, if you financing a power plant, the business plan run very well when you supply every day 8,000 a year, the production of hydrogen, not only some year when you have overproduction of electricity, because the cost of the electrolyzer, the cost of all equipment are very high comparing to how many hours you run your plant. So it's very important to consider for starting this economy based on the new carrier energy is best to consider also the economy and the sustainability in not only in renewable energy, but the sustainability of economic field. So this is my opinion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Cotana, for your insights. And another final comment is that also bioenergy includes as well biomass coming from waste. As Professor Coelho mentioned, there is another resource, and is another way to, let's say, enhance the efficiency of sectors by extracting the most, let's say, and valorizing these resources. So I believe that there is the need, and this webinar has been very interesting to me to learn that there is a community of practice working hard and relentlessly around these topics, that much more work is needed from the technical side, obviously, but also from the policy side. First of all, to get recognition of biohydrogen as a renewable source of hydrogen, and therefore should probably be discussed at the EU level as falling within the green hydrogen sphere, and also that there is the need to consider different carriers that are not only, we cannot just go with one size fits all. Definitely the approach of having hydrogen as a key component and the Power-to-X approach to complement other aspects of a long-term future is definitely an interesting perspective towards which much work can be done by us and others. So if there is no other question, I will give the floor to Michela for the closing remarks. So let me know if there's any other question, but because I do not see any in the chat. Otherwise, Michela, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marco, for having summarized so well also the discussion, which indeed has been extremely interesting. We've learned a new way of approaching also biohydrogen, which is always stimulating, because the new approaches is always new approaches are always a way of somehow thinking out of the box and see how we could learn from each other and take advantage of the professionalism and passion that each of us has in our field of experience to join forces and see how we could move forward. And just to conclude, maybe a forward-looking approach, really in light of the discussion we've had today, is really needed, not only from the technical side, which we've seen how it's applied, I mean, in different sectors, also in terms of policies, in order to facilitate a further application, development, and deployment of these technologies into the real world, into the real field, in order to facilitate a net zero growth, which is, of course, the objective of all of us around this table and in the international discussions regarding how bioenergy, amongst the others, could contribute to sustainable development as a whole. So with this, I would like to thank you all speakers, the moderator, all the participants, and to be continued. Of course, the recording of this webinar will be available on the GBEP website, and we look forward to continuing this discussion with you all. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.